Families in Mexico desperately search for their loved ones after this state-owned pipeline exploded, killing at least 90 people. But who's to blame? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Mexico's pipeline explosion. In Mexico's Hidalgo state last Sunday, hundreds of people crowded around a ruptured pipeline to collect from a spewing fountain of fuel. Moments later, disaster struck. The pipeline exploded, killing most almost instantly. Many blamed the victims themselves, a notion Mexico's president, Andres-manuel-lopez-obrador, was quick to reject, instead blaming poverty and unemployment created by his predecessors. Now that the flames are dying down, many want to hold those responsible to account. But who are they? That debate in a moment. But first, here's Randolph Nogel.
Esta explosión que cobró la vida de al menos 20 personas. En el lugar, bueno, pues ya hay familiares al ingreso, en la entrada principal.
The inferno was brought under control at night. But it wasn't until first light that medical workers could begin to assess the human cost. Amateur footage shows people before the blast collecting fuel gushing from a leaking pipeline in central Mexico. By the next day, the small town's residents were looking for friends and family who'd gone missing in the night.
Ya lo reconocimos y nada más estamos esperando que los peritos terminen su trabajo para poder hacer el reconocimiento del cuerpo.
Quisiera tenerlo, no sé, a lo mejor un vivo o no sé lo que pueda pasar, pero quisiera tenerlo ya.
Mexican President Andres-manuel-lopez-obrador arrived just hours after the explosion. He's been praised for his hands-on approach, holding 2 press conferences a day and speaking about how his government plans to respond. While he's promised to step up security to prevent fuel theft, he didn't blame the villagers who'd siphoned off gasoline, but rather their desperate economic conditions.
Ningún mexicano va a tener la necesidad de dedicarse a esas actividades porque va a tener ahora trabajo.
His administration began a crackdown on the country's significant illicit fuel market in December. But it led to shortages in many areas where people rely on buying stolen fuel at cheaper prices. This incident is widely viewed as a first test for Lopez Obrador, who took office last month after campaigning against corruption. He said his attorney general will investigate the response by security forces, as well as that of the state-run oil firm Pemex. The country's outdated pipeline system is vulnerable to thousands of illegal taps every year. Lopez Obrador's administration is instead investing in military trucks to transport fuel. But it will take more time to see if his administration can make good on his long-term pledges to bring down crime and improve the lives of Mexico's poor. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to our panel now. In Mexico City is Federico Lemons. He's a journalist with El Sol de Mexico newspaper. Also with us is Jaime Lopez Aranda Trewata. He's a security analyst and former Mexican government official. Gentlemen, I thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Jaime, let me start with you. After the tragedy, people want answers and they want to hold someone to account. Who do you hold to account with a tragedy like this?
Well, there's a lot of blame to go around. I mean, on many levels. It's hard to pin it on a single person because it was an institutional failure. The people on the ground probably acted, the soldiers and the federal police on the ground probably acted correctly, being circumstances. But the question remains why they were not given adequate support or why they were not given backup in a timely fashion. There's also to blame, in a larger scheme, Pemex, because of the protocols and the series of mistakes that it has made in its regarding security. You could also place the blame on the local government, the state government and the municipal government that have allowed these activities to continue unimpeded for a long time. There's a lot, this is a huge illegal market there. You could fault the federal government as a whole for having been implementing anti-oil theft strategy that, clearly hasn't produced any visible results. And still has caused a fuel shortage. I mean, again, there's a lot of blame to go around. It was an institutional failure on all levels.
Okay.
Of course, you could also blame to some extent the people who actually rushed towards the fuel for, the blatant disregard for their own safety, I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. So institutional failure. Let's take this, I guess, in two layers, right? So we'll discuss the deeper layers in a moment. But Federico, would you accept that on the surface layer, that police, or the army rather, failed to cordon off the area and they might have saved lives, and also the oil company probably should have stopped pumping oil once they knew there was a breach? Can we at least admit that both those things were wrong?
Yeah, because as far as I'm concerned, they weren't informed at least 6 hours before the explosion. And the monopoly, Pemex, is to be blamed because in 2009, they delivered to the governors and mayors its security map. And that is why some governors who now are indicted and wants to be extradited to the United States have that security route. That is since 2009. So Pemex monopoly is to be blamed, and probably the army as well, because they couldn't handle the whole story. And that is why at least 500 people got close to the pipeline, and they all knew what was going to happen. And so army and both local and state government are to be blamed, but not this current government. I'm talking about Felipe Calderon governor, his presidency, because they delivered that security map to the three state level of government.
Jaime, when we look at government responsibility, this current government saying we've inherited a mess from the previous government, is that fair?
Well, it's a political stance. I'll give them that. You have to, pretty much every single government in Mexico has inherited a mess from the previous one. And not only in Mexico, Latin America and around the world. That's just kind of the thing you do. But it contradicts itself in two important manners. The first one is after the electoral victory, what the current government said, the incoming government then, what they said was that they appreciated economic stability, they appreciated the conditions that they were being handed over the country. It was a long transition with designated people for that. So to call yourself surprised after all those months, that's kind of disingenuous. On a deeper level, on a more important level, it's like they're basically doing, for the most part, what their predecessors have been doing. Federico mentioned the Calderon administration, also the Peña administration. The anti-oil theft strategy of Lopez Obrador is practically indistinguishable from theirs, except for closing down the pipelines, which again caused some problems. So I would say that more than a fair characterization, it's a political one. Again, at some point there was this major crisis in Mexico, the economic crisis, and the president at the time said, you know what, they gave me they handed over the economy with me, hanging by a thread. And his predecessor basically said, it's like, yeah, but I didn't cut the thread. It's always hanging by a thread. So if you're aware that there is there are major problems and that there are major obstacles, which pretty much everybody who has ever been in the government knows that there's always major obstacles and there's always major problems, then perhaps you should be more careful with your approach.
Right. Okay, so let me ask Federico. Federico, is that a fair point from Jaime, that it's an easy cop-out for this government to say, well, the mess comes from the previous government, they just handed over the reins to us and we're just getting our feet under the desk? There has been a transition. They have had an opportunity to try and fix this. Why blame the previous government?
Because it has a date. Let us back to 2002 under President Fox administration. He knew what was happening inside Pemex, and particularly with its union workers. In 2002, there's a pipeline in Tula, which was stolen from the drug smugglers, because those who have been stealing gas or fuel from Mexico's oil monopoly belongs to the gangs. And so the Mexican government knew about that in 2002. That's exactly what President Lopez Obrador has stated yesterday during his press conference. he turns us back to 2002, and he says at least $25 billion has been stolen by the drug leaders, and they belong to what we call huachicoleros. So when President Lopez Obrador was in his political campaign, he promised to the people that he was going to stop this turning of fuel thieves all around the Mexican Republic. And though he never established a date, probably by his end of his tenure, he's going to crack down all of those thieves who belongs to different gang cartel leaders. There are two possible thief leaders, one from Tamaulipas and the other one from the state of Hidalgo, and those are to be blamed due to this stalling of fuel all around the Mexican Republic.
Okay,
well, they have names.
Okay, interesting. I want to bring in Jaime. So, and sorry to interrupt you, right, Jaime? So you have the leadership making that distinction between those who are the cartel leaders of this illicit operation and this illegal oil siphoning, and the ordinary people who were blown up. And we have President Andres-manuel-lopez-obrador saying, we have the conviction that the people are good, that they are honest, that if they arrived at these extremes, these practices, it's because they were completely abandoned by the state. And so he refused to victimize those people. Would you agree that that was extremely important for him to do that?
Yes, I mean, it was pretty much the only appropriate option he had. I mean, going back to, right now, President Lopez Obrador has gone back to the, back in the campaign, he used this phrase that became like this catchphrase, right? Abrazos, no balazos, which translates roughly as hugs, not getting shot or not being shot. Basically, what he said was that his presidency was going to emphasize the social, the more soft side, trying to bring the people into the fold, not using as much, coercive force. So going back to that, in the face of more than 80 people getting blown up, who are clearly not part of any criminal organization, it was the only appropriate option, and I think it was the right call to make. Having said that, it does show the limits or the inadequacies of his strategy. Because as Federico was saying, he was saying correctly, of course there are big criminal groups behind this. Some of them are identified, some of them are not. Some of them are connected to them, and some of them are not. But at the same time, what we saw in the explosion, in this huge tragedy, was not the organized crime, the abstract organized crime with high-profile names. What we saw was actual people, civilians, people from the street getting blown up. And they were participating not in the huachicoleo as we tend to simplify. They were trying to take advantage of an opportunity to, basically to steal. But in a Mexican way, we would say, they were stealing, but just a little bit. This social component, this social tolerance for this sort of low-level petty crime is a major issue now.
Federico?
Those are people who are on their poverty level. They earn, those who work close to last Friday pipeline, they earn at least $3 a day as a wage for living. So they're not, we can't take them as vulgars, as thieves. They're people who want to survive by taking gas, and that's what they have to take to their own homes. But some of them, not the majority, probably might have links with the smugglers. The smugglers have been settled at the state of Hidalgo for 20 years. Not only there, Veracruz, Tamaulipas as well. And those smugglers wants to buy the fate of people with 2,000 pesos a day. So I'm talking about $80. So that's the main problem. How are you going to stop this spreading of oil theft if people don't have a way to survive? That's the main issue. And today's government is doing what it can in order to solve that big problem.
Jaime?
But what I'm sorry to interrupt. This is a more point. This is a cost-benefit analysis. And quite frankly, I don't think anybody's asking the Mexican government to stop people who end up with with 20 gallons of gas. Honestly. not only, it's not about them being poor, because, I mean, poverty, 40% of the country is poor. Most of them are not involved. The people in Hidalgo, as you were saying, Federico, I mean, they live in the midst of a gigantic black market. I mean, they knew they would be able to sell this gasoline because most of them don't have cars. It's part of being poor in Hidalgo at this point. But I think this is an interesting point. Nobody's asking to get these guys, to put these guys in jail. I mean, some people are, but I mean, those are morons. I mean, to be completely truthful about it. This is not the kind of oil theft that the strategy is supposed to fight. And that was clear from the get-go because of the people, I mean, the military they sent to the site, I mean, they were not equipped for crowd control. They were looking for a huachicolero band. I mean, they would decide to track down a huachicolero band. And instead they ran into a crowd. But in terms of the strategy, the overall strategy and looking forward, it's like, yeah, we should not be going after petty theft. Not only because they're poor or because they are the good people. I mean, that's a different debate, I would say. But because petty theft, I mean, chasing petty theft like this is much more costly. Too costly. We just saw it. Going after, I mean, that was supposed to be, the whole event was supposed to be about civil protection. It was about safety. It wasn't about law enforcement. It couldn't have been about law enforcement. We can't afford to be going after the little guys. No country can.
So, Federico, we have the government of President Lopez Obrador announcing a community development program, saying they want to address the root causes, they want to stop illegal industry, they want to go after the cartels. Is the reality basically that tragedies such as this one will continue to happen unless and until Mexico reforms the whole society? You have to stop corruption, you have to stop poverty, you have to fix everything to fix this thing. Is that the reality?
Well, according to what President Lopez Obrador have stated during his last political campaign, at least $90 billion, and according to the World Bank, are stolen or were stolen by the other administrations. I'm talking about Peña Nieto, Calderón, and Fox. That's exactly what Lopez Obrador has stated. And yesterday, during his press conference, he announced a big social program that will provide not only money, but the tools for those empowered people to survive. So it's amazing what the former governors or the former presidents have done to Mexico. There is one single president who has been blamed to earn $25 billion when he finished his tenure. So what can you do with a country that has at least 80 million people who lives under poverty level?
Okay.
And with those
okay.
who...
Okay,
Yeah.
So let me get a final response from Jaime, because you made the point, right? Is the real problem here, Jaime, that previous administrations, rather than poor people siphoning oil, the real problem is previous administrations have siphoned the nation's funds? That's it, no more, no less.
No, it's way more complicated than that. I mean, of course there has been corruption. But, and this is something, I understand the point. I mean, that's why Lopez Obrador got elected with such a wide margin. I mean, that's where his legitimacy comes in. I mean, there were like huge blunders, enormous corruption cases, very high-profile cases. And yeah, I mean, that was a driver for the election. It was a correct driver for the election. Now, this is government. This is different. What the President Lopez Obrador and his cabinet is, I mean, what they're realizing is that corruption takes a lot of forms, and coming up with big numbers is not public policy. And this is the main problem. I mean, of course, you have to do things. Of course, you have to root out corruption. I love what you said about reforming the whole Mexican society. Yeah, I think that's an universal aspiration, I think. Mm-hmm. But in practical terms, you have to go down to the ground and actually take concrete steps.
Right.
One of the concrete steps that Federico was already referring, I mean, giving money to people who are below the poverty line, who might be at risk of becoming involved in criminal activities. Yeah, that doesn't work. It's a good thing to do. I mean, let's be clear. It's a good thing to do. People deserve to have these transfers. But that has not
diminish crime anywhere.
Okay. Well, it's regrettable that it's regrettable that it took for almost 100 people to die for us to have what I think is a really important conversation about the very state of how Mexico is run. And I look forward to having more conversations with you two gentlemen in the future. Federico Lamont and Jaime Lopez Aranda Trewata, thank you very much for joining us. Coming up next, rising inequality. Oxfam says the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. But is a higher tax on the wealthy the answer? And millions of Palestinians require aid. But is a US counter-terrorism law preventing them from getting it? Right now, the world's most rich and powerful are in Davos, Switzerland, for the annual World Economic Forum. Every year, they discuss how to improve the state of the globe. According to the British charity Oxfam, things are getting worse. In their annual report, they found that just 26 of the world's richest billionaires own as much as the poorest half of humanity. So, if the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, what's the answer? Well, TRT World was in Davos for the summit and caught up with Oxfam's executive director, Winnie Byanyima. And she thinks Oxfam has the solution.
Our report sounds an alarm that extreme inequality is out of control. Last year alone, the wealth of billionaires was increasing by 12%, $2.5 billion every day. On the other hand, the bottom 3.8 billion people, half of humanity, their wealth was dropping by 11%. And we place the biggest responsibility on governments. Governments are choosing to undertax big companies and rich individuals. Only 4 cents out of every dollar of tax revenue comes from taxing wealth. The result is that these governments are choosing then to cut public services on which most people depend. That is resulting in austerity, in pushing poor people to the bottom by denying them essential public services. This is in the South, in the developing countries, and also in rich countries. Take the UK. 14 million people in the UK are living in poverty. That's 1 out of 5. They are fueling public anger. Majority of people are feeling left out. Our politics have become so poisonous. Our societies are so divided. This is a result of how our economies are managed. It doesn't have to be like this.
Well, joining me now from London is Alex Cobham. He's the Chief Executive for the Tax Justice Network and a trustee for ActionAid, an NGO working to combat poverty. And in New Delhi is Rajneesh Narula. He's an international business regulation professor at the University of Reading's Henley Business School. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Alex Cobham, let me start with you. So Oxfam comes out with this report. They tell us the 26 richest people on earth in 2018 had the same net worth as the poorest half of the world's population. Is that consistent with everything that you've seen and all the work you do?
Absolutely. You know, the Tax Justice Network exists to track and to try to fight the processes of tax avoidance and tax evasion and the rigging of the rules that give us this race to the bottom on taxation and regulation, all of which result in the greater concentration of political power, of wealth, and of income. So these numbers moving in this direction are entirely consistent with that.
Right.
I'm afraid we can only expect it to get worse.
Right. The Center for Global Development and Credit Suisse have their own studies, and they question Oxfam's numbers a little bit. They agree. The inequality is bad. Clearly, there's a problem, right? So we won't get into the semantics of the numbers and just how many billionaires are there, you know, that are holding so much or how much of the world's wealth. But why would you say that this is directly linked to not taxing people enough?
Oh, look, we know that when you're talking about billions of people living in abject poverty and a few people with billions more than they could ever conceivably spend in their lifetime, you know that there's a problem. If aliens were to arrive on the planet today and look at us and think about the difference between where we are now and where we could be in terms of reaching the human capacity, the opportunities that we all have, if we were to distribute things a bit more equally, they'd laugh at us. They'd think we were crazy for having chosen this extreme radical inequality that we have. This is really about whether or not governments at national level and through international coordination are willing to make the decisions challenging their own elites that will ensure that the elites are a little bit less distant from everyone else, and the people at the bottom and in the middle are a little bit higher up, have better opportunities for health and education and so on, which would make the planet, a much better place, and our own human achievements all the better for us.
Rajneesh, Narula, those very elites are sitting in Davos trying to come up with solutions to this inequality. Do you trust them?
No, not at all. I don't think I think the problem is much more complicated than that. It's not enough just to increase taxes or try and tax rich people, because there's also, these are people in different countries and across countries, and you have the problem within countries. The big problem really here is how is efficient government policies that actually do something rather than collecting taxes. Getting more money or making the rich poorer isn't the solution.
Rajneesh, for those who say clearly capitalism has failed, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, do they have a point?
Completely. This is very much about globalization. Much of what we see going on, the election of Trump's policies, populist approaches, Brexit, these reflect a large percentage of the population not being happy with their opportunities, their standards of living, the quality of their lives, what they can expect, the high level of uncertainty because of now we have the gig economy, flexible employment, not enough pensions. So all of these problems have made people concerned about this, and they're reacting to this. So yes, there is a problem.
Yeah, Alex Cobham, are we entering a new age of feudalism?
What we've seen is governments in rich countries as well as in lower income countries effectively acquiescing in the undermining of direct taxation by failing to challenge the tax avoidance of multinational companies and the offshore tax evasion of their own elites, which cost something between $400 and $700 billion each year in lost revenue around the world. Governments are accepting that they're going to leave people at the bottom without health and education, without income, sometimes without even sufficient food, simply because they won't challenge this system. Now, until we do that, we're really not going to see significant progress against inequality within countries or between countries. The international inequality in the distribution of taxing rights favours high-income countries over low-income countries, and that has to be challenged. Now, if the question is whether we expect the people in Davos, the very people who benefit most from this unjust system, to be the ones who lead the charge for change, I think we're kidding ourselves. We need to be looking at a different type of politics that will see people take back control and look to re-establish the social contract.
But you're saying, sorry to interrupt you, Alex, but you're saying we need a new politics, right? Those who vote for the likes of Trump or Bolsonaro are saying this is precisely what we're doing. So Bolsonaro is in Davos, and Bolsonaro and his supporters in Brazil would say the previous government implemented the very suggestions that Oxfam had. The previous government went and had these health and social programs and said we need higher taxation, and they screwed up our economy and they took away our growth, and that's why we need a new Brazil and we need to reimpose new thinking. Can you understand why the populists would look at new thinking as the solution, which is fundamentally diametrically opposed to what you're thinking?
Oh, sure. This kind of disaster capitalism creates the conditions to some extent for its own continuation. But we have to recognise that the inequality we're talking about isn't just economic, it's also political. What you've seen in these countries that you mentioned, for example, is the growing influence of money on results and an acceptance that a rigging of the political rules is basically okay. Until we take out a lot of both the dirty money and the corporate money from our politics, we're going to continue to allow elections to be bought, as we've seen in countries around the world. And that means we'll never see a politics that reflects the desire for redistribution, which is actually present among the majority of people in most countries.
Rajneesh, as we look at solutions, right, do you think that the fact that socialism and communism had such spectacular failures over the past 100 years or so means that anytime somebody tries to question the status quo right now, you can point to the gulags and the tens of millions of people killed and say, well, clearly this system's the best system, so we need to soldier on and keep on going. Is that what happens, or, you know, whenever you try to think of creative solutions?
Well, you know, I agree with my esteemed colleague here that something has to be done. The system is no longer fit for purpose. What I'm not entirely certain that I agree with is whether taxes are going to solve the problem. It's what you do with the taxes that matters. And one of the problems is we're functioning in a system where you have people who are not skilled for the jobs that are available out there. So we're moving to a world in the rich countries, for instance, where we don't need factory workers, we don't need farmers as much. Now, these farmers, these factory workers need to be trained or retrained in some way. And some of them are 50 years old or 40 years old and so forth. How do you retrain a farmer to be a dentist or a doctor or an engineer? It's quite difficult. Who picks up the cost? And here comes the tax issue. How do you use the money that is raised? It's not enough to raise more taxes or to stop the corporate buyout of politicians, but how you use the money that's raised efficiently in the 21st century. It isn't enough to have more universities. It's about having the right kinds of education for the times we are in. And I think this is a very, very important point. How is this money going to be spent? So there are no ideas coming out. Nobody wants to talk about how the education system needs to be modified, how lifelong learning is important, how people are living to be 90 years old, but they retire at 55 or 60 or 65. Who pays their pension, their health services, and so forth? So poverty gets created because we're thinking with a set of rules that come from perhaps the beginning of the 20th century or the middle of the 20th century. But these are things that no longer, the world doesn't function in quite the same way.
Mm-hmm. Alex, do we have to have different rules for different systems? So, okay, in Western industrialized country where there is strong rule of law, maybe you can tax the elite or the super rich at a higher rate, and that money can be used for better things. But that can't apply in a country where there's rampant political corruption, because, you know, that's just more money to the government, and that's oiling the pockets or lining the pockets of the elite.
No, that's exactly the wrong way around. And this is a problem that we've had for a long time, that way of thinking. The International Monetary Fund, although in the last 10 years it's really improved its position, for a long time it pushed this tax consensus that said, look, direct taxes on incomes, profits and capital gains, they're really too difficult for lower income countries. So they shouldn't worry about that. They should do perhaps trade taxes, but ideally sales taxes, VAT. The effect of that is not only do you raise less revenue in countries that need it most, but actually you have a regressive tax system, so you also have higher inequality than you need to. And worst of all, is actually direct taxes, the evidence shows, that create the strongest link between people and their governments, that builds the social contract. So you have much better political representation when people are paying direct taxes. You know, the taxes that hurt, you don't notice VAT, but you notice the PAYE that comes out of your salary each month, and then you hold government to account. So where you have systems with higher direct taxes, you have much less corruption. In fact, we need to start thinking, as finally has begun to happen, about tax as an input to a good system of government. So if you get taxes right, you don't just have more money, you spend the money better because you have less corruption. And this is one of very few things actually in the world that turns out to be associated with less corruption.
Alex,
we should really make use of it.
Right, there seems to be a paradox here globally in terms of the trends, because on the one hand, yes, inequality is widening and deepening, and perhaps especially in Western industrialized countries, wages are depreciating year after year, decade after decade. People tend to suffer and slipping out of the middle class and so on. Yet in some parts of the world, extreme poverty is being eradicated. Both these things seem to be happening simultaneously. How do you explain that?
So the extreme poverty numbers are contested, let's say. We know a lot of the story is about China opening up its economy. So it has very little to do with policy decisions taken anywhere else in the world. And outside of that, the numbers actually are much less clear, although there seems to be progress in terms of the very most extreme poverty. But those poverty lines are about people living on much less income than any human should have to live on. If you look at a higher poverty line that's closer to some kind of a standard of living, the progress is much less obvious. So we still have a long way to go. And of course, inequality patterns vary by country and by region over time. There's not a single pattern happening in the world. But if we look at Western countries that have faced the financial crisis and often pursued austerity, if we take the UK as an example, what we see is a real extreme step backwards. You know, the UK has cut its corporate income tax. It's reduced other taxes too, especially direct taxes. And it's seen this very sharp jump in vulnerability and poverty. In one of the richest countries in the world, we've done that to ourselves by choice. And that's really a shocking thing to say about any government. And that's exactly why we've seen this rise in a populist sentiment that says there has to be better than this. There has to be an enemy that I can say causes this and lets me be better if I can get free of it, which of course is not the right answer, but it's understandable that that's what people turn to.
Yeah, fundamentally, a lot of people, wondering, is this the invisible hand of the market, or is it a nefarious plot? And nefarious plot becomes a very kind of easy answer for many. Rajneesh, very finally, on a slightly lighter note, guess how many private jets flew into Davos this year?
I think between 200 and 300.
1,500 private jets arrived at Davos this year, 50% more than last year. I'll let that be the final word in the discussion. Gentlemen, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Looking forward to having you on the program again. Thanks for joining us. Billions of people around the world need aid, but providing the help required isn't as easy as it used to be. Why? Counter-terrorism legislation, according to several NGOs, including Norwegian People's Aid. The charity was found guilty of illegally helping terrorists in Palestine and was forced to settle with the U.S. government for more than $2 million. Right now, the U.S. law, called the False Claims Act, stipulates that any NGO that applies for U.S. funding must agree not to provide for groups sanctioned by Washington. That includes Hamas. But how do you help Palestinians in Gaza while avoiding Hamas, who run the place? Well, to discuss this in New York, we're joined by David Abrams. He's the executive director at Zionist Advocacy Center and the lawyer behind the legal campaign against Norwegian People's Aid. In Warrington, Virginia, is Olga Wall. She is an international contracts and grants specialist and a former USAID contracts officer. And with me on set is TRT World producer Obeda Hitto. David, first of all, tell me how much of a victory this was for you that the Norwegian People's Aid had to give the U.S. government $2 million.
It's a victory mainly because it serves notice on all of the humanitarian NGOs that who take U.S. money, that they have to be careful not to get enmeshed with organizations that we consider terrorists in America. In terms of when you say, is it a victory for you? Of course, my organization received a substantial whistleblower award as a result of the settlement.
Okay. And if the reality on the ground is that things are enmeshed and it's hard to avoid groups deemed by the United States and the Israeli government terrorists, it's hard to avoid them while you're actually giving aid to Palestinians in need. Your answer is what?
Well, sir, I question your assumption that it's hard to avoid that. For example, in the Norwegian People's Aid case, it turned out that they had helped the Iranian government to clear mines, not clearing mines to protect villagers from getting hurt, but so that Iran could pump oil. I would respectfully submit to you that a humanitarian organization doesn't need to get involved in helping anyone pump oil. And in fact, my research shows that most of these NGOs do seem to accomplish their mission without giving what we call material support to designated terrorist organizations. So it seems that a lot of them do in fact do it.
Okay, so Olga Wall, is it clear to you that it is easy to avoid spiky groups, if you like, and just get the humanitarian work done?
Well, it's not at all black and white like this. The USAID specifically has very robust regulations in place in the countries where there is a lot of threat of terrorism or potential associations with terrorists. There are vetting procedures in place that go through the U.S. government and local organizations, and the NGOs, just like the contractors, all have to follow those procedures in order to clear as many bad actors as possible before they provide assistance or contracts to those organizations. However, just like you said, it is, if you're working in Palestine, how many people do you think are associated with Hamas that runs the place? And what is the material support? I think it is a question of how much NGOs have to do and where their liability ends, and at which point it becomes cost prohibitive for them to operate in those territories.
Okay. Right
Right now, the NGOs spend on average 20 to 30% of the funding that they receive on compliance.
Right. So,
and another 30% of the administration.
Right.
So
okay.
how much money actually
That's an interesting point. Yeah, that's interesting. Let me bring in Obeda here. So we have the False Claims Act, and David's working to get the U.S. government to essentially enforce their own law. Let me ask you, Obeda, based on your experience, especially on the ground, is this something that's easy to do, or will it leave vulnerable people more vulnerable?
Definitely in this situation in Gaza, it's going to be very difficult for anybody. And this is something that has been going on for the last 15 years at the very least. If you recall, several years ago, there was the Holy Land Foundation trial, which was a case with similar circumstances where an American NGO was providing aid to people in Palestine or in occupied Palestinian territories. And the case against them was that they were providing material support to terrorists, including the Hamas terrorist organization, by way of distributing money and funds and other things to people who were related to Hamas members or who were the sons and daughters and children of people who had been affiliated with the organization. So in Gaza today, or in other places where Hamas is existing today, or other terrorist organizations, it's going to be very difficult for any aid organization or any international institution to determine who is a terrorist and who's not a terrorist. The other issue here is defining what is material support. I was reading some information about other work that Mr. Abrams has engaged in, and it seems like he hasn't had so much success in convincing the American court system with his argument that violations of this False Claims Act are not actually happening in the way that he is portraying. With the Carter Center, he argued that they were presenting snacks and food and water and drinks to members of Hamas, to members of the Hamas organization at meetings where they were discussing how to deal with the situation in the Middle East and deal with the Palestine-Israel conflict. And this is the Carter Center is a known NGO that conducts these kinds of meetings and workshops and open sessions where people from different parts of a conflict or different sides of a conflict can come and discuss these situations. And so when they held this meeting, Abrams argues that they were providing material support by facilitating that meeting.
Okay, so David, if you hold a meeting with Hamas, and the reason you're having a meeting with Hamas is because there is a conflict. You wouldn't need the meeting if there wasn't a conflict. If you're sitting down with them and you give them potato chips, is that material support?
Yes, it is, but the material support we're talking about goes a lot further than just handing someone a bottle of water, okay? Because there's different terrorist organizations in and around Israel. There's the Hamas, of course, but there's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And these organizations are all illegal. And if you host a meeting where these organizations get together, you're essentially harboring terrorists. And all of these organizations, to the extent that they are trying to destroy Israel, if you get them together and you let them work out their differences,
himself met with Hamas. I mean, was Jimmy Carter harboring terrorists when he met with Khalid Mashal a few years ago?
I respectfully submit that his organization's office in Ramallah was in fact harboring terrorists, based on what I've seen. And if you allow them to work out their differences, that releases all the more energy for attacks on Israel.
So, David, I just want to make clear that you might have this position and you might argue that their meeting in Ramallah in 2015 was their act of harboring terrorists and providing them with snacks and the ability to network. All of this might, in your opinion, mean that they were providing material support to terrorism. But the Department of Justice told very clearly about this particular case that you and the Carter Center had a difference of opinion on how to solve problems in the Middle East, and that the Carter Center was not engaged in providing material support to terrorism. So it seems like you're using this False Claims Act in such a way that you can push your own political agenda. And it seems like the Zionist Advocacy Center kind of gives it away. Using such a name like Zionist Advocacy Center might, make you very much biased in that particular situation.
Okay, David, respond.
May I ask David?
Okay, Olga, just a second, Olga. David, come in.
So I'm completely an advocate for Israel, and I've never made any secret of that fact. In the case of the Carter Center, the United States government did disagree with me, and they are ultimately the plaintiff in the case. It's their decision whether to go forward with the case, and they decided not to do so. So in effect, yes, I lost that case. I prevailed in another case. I have many more cases pending.
Right. And
ultimately, the government in America is going to decide if those cases have merit.
Okay. And you tried to seek penalties against Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, as well. I understand you lost that case. I want to bring in Olga. Olga, you want to jump in?
Sure. Well, I would like to ask David is that if we are not going to draw the line for the material support at the potato chips and water and having meetings and negotiating, do you think that Palestine deserves any aid? Because by that definition, we should not be providing aid to anybody, right? Because if you have a Ketam case, which is what these cases are, the Ketam is a U.S., is a whistleblower law that allows you to bring on a case against a company that is violating laws or regulations or terms of their contract with the U.S. government. And as part of that Ketam recovery, you get 20 to 30% if you prove in a court of law that, or the Justice Department agrees with you, that they have in fact violated that law. So that's very profitable for you, and it's a very profitable thing to do. It exists there for a reason. But if we are going to prosecute NGOs for providing any kind of support to beneficiaries in Palestine and not draw the line for and not define material support and where those things are excusable, then we should not be providing any aid, correct?
David?
I respectfully disagree with you, ma'am. It's absolutely possible to support the Palestinian Arabs without running afoul of the anti-terrorism certification. And I know this because there's numerous NGOs that are operating in Gaza, that are operating in Judea and Samaria, which is commonly known as the West Bank. And I don't have claims against them, and they don't seem to be supporting terrorist organizations. So it's possible to do it. Now, it's true that there are some costs of compliance. We all in regulated industries have compliance issues, and it's just something that has to be done. My government in America, we've taken a hard line against terrorism. The United States Supreme Court, in a case called, it was the Holder case, they defined material support very broadly. And that's the law in America, and that's what NGOs need to comply with, and it seems that most, in fact, do.
Olga?
So let me ask you this. If you would like to serve the greater good, and you do agree that the Palestinians deserve aid, do you think that the NGOs that are providing aid should be notified when you have the information that is credible enough to show that they're running afoul with the law? Would you not be better serving the Palestinian beneficiaries by providing that information to the NGOs and only prosecuting them if they do not respond to that information in any way?
That's a very interesting question. You know, the law here in America requires that these cases be kept under seal. So I have 5 cases pending now, which I am not allowed to discuss. I can't say who the defendants are. I can't say what evidence I have against them. And that's the law that I have to comply with. And the suggestion you make, that's a very interesting one. And it's one that's worth considering. So I'm not sure that that's legal, but I'll certainly take it under advisement.
Okay. Well, okay. Listen. This is. I've really enjoyed this exchange between the two of you. I just want to kind of step back for a second again. Come back to Obeda here. Big picture from the perspective of Palestinians living in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. If we look at the zeitgeist, right? So we're seeing, whether people agree with David or not, he's winning cases against NGOs such as the Norwegians, right? And we look at the United States, the Trump administration, cutting funds to UNRWA. We see USAID or USAID, whatever you want to call it. We're seeing the US downscaling its operations when it comes to USAID in the occupied Palestinian territories. We have UN OCHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, saying that the Israeli government and the United States making life a little bit difficult working within the occupied territories. For the Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank, what's the message that's being sent to them right now?
The message that's being received in Gaza and the West Bank by Palestinians is that there is not enough effort or political will, let's say, to go against the Zionist lobby in the world, whether it be in America or other places, to figure out a way to relieve the suffering of the normal everyday people. There's a real separation, and you've been to Gaza before, Amran. You know that there is a real separation between the normal people in Gaza and the Hamas terrorist wing, if you will, the armed terrorist wing. They are not intermingling in such a way that every other person is a Hamas member. There are people who have nothing to do with Hamas living in Gaza. There are people who are from the West Bank, who were deported from the West Bank by Israel, living in Gaza. People who have nothing to do with Hamas. People from other political parties. So when you attack or try and send a message like Mr. Abrams said, that people need to be aware that if they're going to be dealing with terrorist groups, that they're going to be attacked in the legal system, it's going to make people afraid of supporting Palestinian issues. And Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank recognize that. They know that people are afraid to help them. They feel like they are more isolated than before because it's becoming more difficult for aid organizations to get money, to get help, to get services to the people who are in Palestine, especially the Gaza Strip and the West Bank.
And my further question beyond that, which we don't have the scope in this conversation to cover, is how does that play out on the ground politically? And might it be a possibly terrible thing? Listen, we're out of time, but I appreciate you all joining us here on the Newsmakers. David Abrams, Olga Wall, and Obeda Hito. I hope you'll all come back onto the program. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Tunisians fought for democratic freedoms 8 years ago. Now they're rising up to demand jobs. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.